Harry Wimmer, slightly known as a concert cellist and also as a conductor. But this isn't about me. My wife, the beloved violinist and teacher Shirley has a talent that is largely unknown, that of a self-taught, versatile graphic artist. But she's also a very private person. So it took quite a bit of persuasion for me to talk her into a private showing of her artwork in our home. The overwhelming response by so many of her friends and colleagues made me dare to present this wonderful exhibit to a wider audience. We hope that you will join us in this celebration.
Welcome to my Vanity Fair open house. This is a display of artwork that I've done throughout my whole life. There are oil paintings, watercolors, caricatures, comic strips, posters, and of course my Violin Land books, which are illustrated, and Harry's cello books, which are illustrated by me. I always felt that being an instrumentalist, the art gave me a chance to broaden my horizons and to fulfill me more as an artist, not just a violinist. So I hope you enjoyed looking at these works of art. I certainly had fun doing them. My love for drawing and artwork started very young, as it does with most children. This is a picture that I drew when I was 4.5 years old. Back in those days, there was a day once a year known as Poppy Day. And these were sponsored by the American Legion, and they sold poppies for $1 a piece, and all the proceeds went to the war veterans. So this was my poster for Poppy Day, and this is my flag for Poppy Day. These are high school watercolors that I did. I first started to paint after crayons and Crayolas. I started to paint with watercolors, and I enjoyed that very much, especially drawing flowers. I loved that. Then I went to a music camp in Ohio called Muskingum Lake Music Camp, and of course it was all about music, except they had one instructor who was an art instructor, and he knew of my interest in art, and so he asked me, do I want to try an oil painting? Of course I did. So he got a bowl of pansies, set them on a table, and he said, here, let's paint these pansies. So I just got so enthralled to working with oils, and I painted this picture of pansies, and it earned me my one and only short-lived nickname, Pansy Face, which my campmates called me for about a week. This picture was painted the following summer at the same Muskingum Music Camp in Ohio with the same art instructor, Vernon Beddoes. This time he said, why don't we take a walk in the country and paint some of the countryside scenes? So I must admit that those 2 weeks of music camp, I did more oil painting than practicing the violin. So it really fostered my love of oil painting, and this is one of my favorites. In the months before Harry's first town hall debut concert, where they were hectic and intense to say the least. So after the concert was over, the next day, I fled to Ohio to my parents' house, set up my easel in the basement, and I painted this picture furiously, mostly with a palette knife. And my older sister Eleanor called it cracked, and I think she was right. This picture was my second abstract picture, and as you can see, it was in a much more serene mood than cracked. So I love this painting because during the day, as the sun comes up and down and the clouds change outside, the colors in this painting seem to change as well. So it's a really pleasure to look at any hour of the day. I wanted to paint a portrait of my father, who was a hero in World War I, awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, Purple Heart, and many other medals of valor. So I went to Lee's art store because I had never painted a portrait. I went to Lee's art store downtown New York and bought a book, How to Paint a Portrait. Well, I tried to follow the directions exactly because I was supposed to paint in the sepia colors, just block out darks and lights and get sort of an overall idea of the portrait. But I got carried away and I began painting very, very detailed picture of my father. And as I was ready to put the colors in, my husband Harry wisely said, don't put colors in, just leave it this way because it's very beautiful, just the way it is in the dark colors. And you know, my dad was an outdoor person and this sort of fit his nature, sort of rugged outdoor nature. It was also exhibited in the Canton Art Museum for one of their spring shows. Anyway, my dad was so happy with this picture. This was my most recent abstract painting, and it's always a puzzle to me to know when an abstract painting is actually finished. Should I add another little streak of red, or should I add a blob of white? So you just never know when it's finished. So at a certain point, you just have to sigh and walk away. These poppies were painted by my mother, who was a wonderful artist in many ways, but she never could draw. So whenever I was home in Ohio or as I was growing up, she always had me do the drawing, and then she did the painting. So these poppies were drawn by me, but painted by my mother. I love them. They look very beautiful. This is a portrait of my mother, Hilda Stuckert Givens. I need to quote John Singer Sargent, who said, quote, "A portrait is a painting with something wrong about the mouth." And that's what I feel about this portrait, although it's a pretty good likeness of her. And now I quote from my mother, who said, "Isn't it a shame that you never did anything with your art?" This is my second portrait, that of my little sister Carol Sue, called her Susie. She was a Down syndrome child, and the sweetest thing in all of our lives. We all loved her. Harry loved her, I loved her, my children, Tiana and Kevin, loved her. And whenever she came to visit, she was always just a welcome part of our household. She loved to color with crayons, so I decided to do a picture of her drawing with her beloved crayons. And I tried to make this portrait more in the impressionistic style, so it would be soft and gentle, as was her nature. This is a very glamorized portrait of myself at the age 15 or 16 giving a violin recital. And I always imagined that those hands on the piano belonged to a tall, dark, and handsome pianist. These are string portraits, mostly done in Aspen, to encourage the young and talented students to come and play in Harry's Aspen String Ensemble, encourage violinists, violists, cellists to take part in the very exciting concerts that Harry conducted.
One of the most challenging posters was the one in which we performed the Carnival of Animals of Saint-Saëns, which is scored for 2 pianos and orchestra. This presented a real problem because I wanted Shirley to draw the 2 pianists as antagonists, protagonists, and she managed, after many tries, to capture the pause of the competing 2 pianists. This was also a challenge because I needed a narrator who had a big voice. And so, in the Aspen pool, I approached the famous violinist Itzhak Perlman and begged him to read the narration for us, and he was delighted. And he practiced the Ogden Nash verses on many of his colleagues before the performance.
These are mostly sketches that I did during summer music festivals when I was either bored at the concerts or just had fun. These were two conductors. This was the Juilliard String Quartet that I did. And this was a quartet that I played in Vancouver. You could hardly see me because the first violinist was very prominent. These were all colleagues that we had in the summer in Aspen. These are violin faculties. This was one of my early teachers at Juilliard, Hans Letts. This is Dorothy DeLay. For her birthday, I sent her a birthday card, and this was a copy of the birthday card that I sent her. These were my colleagues at Peabody Conservatory. My student Pamela Frank was one of those colleagues. This is Itzhak Perlman, small picture. And here's Sidney Harth, one of our great friends and colleagues. These are political cartoons that I did during the Watergate period when Senator Sam Erwin was having discussions with John Ehrlichman. When I got bored with watching the TV, I would draw cartoons of them. The top is a current one with Donald Trump without a toupee and with his toupee. This is my idea of what he's wearing on his head. This is a portrait of Tiana when she was about 4 years old and a newborn, Kevin, sitting in her lap. And this is a pose of my beautiful daughter, Tiana, when she was 4 years old. Pictures here are sketches that I made at Meadowmount. My violin teacher, Ivan Galamian, had a summer camp in upstate New York, and I drew these and painted watercolored portraits of some flowers, wildflowers in the neighborhood. This is a display of my artwork from high school where I did a comic strip called The Adventures of Penny. And I did the words, the cartoons, and it was published in the local high school paper. One of them was chosen to be in the national high school paper, The Echo, the National Echo. And this one says, "She cheered him at the game. He talked, she took the blame. His homework she did acclaim, but at the dance he took the other dame." That gives you an idea of the character of Penny. For many years there hung in this very spot a tapestry, a lovely French tapestry that I inherited from my family. And over the years it began to look more faded, began to look a little shabby, and we both wanted this room to be more cheerful. So Harry suggested I take the tapestry down and do an oil painting that would reflect the cheery character that we wanted to have for this room. So this is the picture, the result of taking down that faded tapestry and putting up something bright. I was one summer in teaching in Vancouver, I got very interested in ponytails. So I began to draw everybody I could find who had a ponytail of any kind, of any sort. And finally at the end I said, this is the original ponytail, the one on the pony. In addition to ponytails, I have a fascination with different hairdos, and often at concerts I'm sitting behind people with different kinds of hairdos, so I enjoy drawing them and then seeing what they look like from the front.
Shirley and I are very proud of our publications. At present, there are 41 of them, and they're all in print. They consist, first of all, of The Adventures of Violin Land. There's a series of beginners' books on violin, and they encompass 4 years. The red books are the first year, the blue the second, the yellow the third, and the green the fourth year. Shirley did all the covers and all the illustrations inside the books. Recently, I decided to do the cello books for beginners, and I did the first 6 of the first year. They're in red, and they're called Adventures in Cello Country. And of course, Shirley did all the illustrations and the covers. Several years ago, I did a series for adult cellists called The Joy of Cello Playing. All the insides have illustrations about cello position and so on. And what I'm most proud of is my arrangement of the beautiful Brahms sonata in E flat, originally for a clarinet. So, finally, I want to show you Shirley's illustrations of her characters from her books. In this version, she painted them in color, and they are shown on her website, Gibbons Violin Land. I'm an officer of the Cello Society, and as such, once in a while I write things for their newsletter. One of these was a spoof called Special Session in Cello Paradise. And I asked Shirley to illustrate that for me, and she was a good sport and drew the famous Feuermann, the famous Pablo Casals, the famous Piatigorsky, and also Slava Rosipovich, Victor Herbert, and finally all the famous lady cellists, Jacqueline Dupre, Zara Nelsova, and so on and so forth, Guillermina Succhia. Also, for another newsletter, I wrote a story about a famous German cellist called Grützmacher, and he was known as the cellist who arranged and actually doctored the famous Boccherini cello concerto in B flat. And Shirley made a caricature for me in which he, in a way, went into modern times and did some cutting and pasting of the original Boccherini concerto, which is rather boring. And so I wrote a story about that, and that appeared in another issue of the Cello Society newsletter. For 6 summers, we taught at the GISA Festival in Victoria, Canada, near Vancouver. One of the most challenging works we did was a string orchestra version of Arnold Schoenberg's Verklärte Nacht, or Transfigured Night. And I prevailed on Shirley to draw Schoenberg in his shorts and Birkenstock sandals, and I think it came out really well. Back in New York, and as a cellist and sometime actor, I concocted a series of 7 zany concerts. Shirley was willing to make a drawing for the big full-size posters. Another poster was one of a concert called Musical Stops on the Orient Express.